Dubai Airport, August 3, 2016. A Boeing 777 glides toward the runway, smooth, steady, flawless. But seconds before touchdown, the wind shifts. The pilots pull the jet back into the sky, unaware that in those few seconds their fate has already been sealed. What followed wasn't just an accident. It was a miracle born from fire. Dubai Airport, August 3, 2016. The morning sun was already melting over the desert horizon. Inside the cockpit of Emirates Flight 521, a massive Boeing 777-300, Captain Humaid Al-Amiri and First Officer Jeremy Webb prepared for landing. They'd flown for over 3 hours from Thiruvananthapuram, India, a routine route with 282 passengers and 18 crew on board. But that morning, something felt different. The heat outside was brutal, 49 degrees C. The air shimmered above the runway, distorting everything like a mirage. Visibility was good, but the temperature created invisible pockets of unstable air, wind shear conditions. As the Boeing lined up for its approach, the control tower cleared them to land on runway 12L. The pilots armed the spoilers, lowered the landing gear, and began their final descent. Everything looked perfect: speed, altitude, configuration, until the very last seconds. Suddenly, a burst of hot desert wind hit the aircraft's underbelly. The auto throttles pulled back. The plane floated higher, too high, and the ground began slipping away again. "Go round," the captain called. The throttles surged forward, engines roared, and the plane climbed sharply back into the sky. It was a normal procedure. Pilots train for it every month. But this time, the engines weren't responding fast enough. For a few critical seconds, the 777 hung in the air. Heavy, slow, struggling to climb. Warning chimes echoed in the cockpit. "Don't sink, don't sink." The pilots didn't realize it yet, but they were running out of time and altitude. At that moment, air traffic control cleared another aircraft for landing. The tower expected Emirates 521 to come back around for a second attempt, but inside the cockpit, confusion was spreading. Captain Humaid believed the plane was climbing, but the flight data showed something else entirely. They were descending, fast. Then came the worst sound a pilot can hear. The ground proximity alarm screamed, "Pull up! Pull up!" Seconds later, impact. The Boeing slammed onto the runway, sparks showering under the fuselage. Both engines tore from the wings and a fireball erupted from below. Inside the cabin, panic took over. But something incredible was about to happen. Something no one expected. The Boeing 777 hit the runway hard. Metal screamed against concrete. The landing gear collapsed instantly, and the aircraft slid on its belly for nearly a kilometer. Inside, passengers were thrown forward as oxygen masks fell from the ceiling. Fire alarms began to wail through the cabin. Smoke poured in from the rear. In the cockpit, both pilots were alive, stunned but conscious. The captain's first words were, "Evacuate! Evacuate now!" But outside, the scene was chaos. The right engine had torn free and burst into flames. Fuel was leaking across the runway, igniting into massive orange waves of fire. Within seconds, the entire rear section was engulfed. Heat filled the cabin so quickly that the plastic panels began to melt. Flight attendants rushed to open the doors, but the slides wouldn't deploy. The aircraft's electrical systems were damaged, and the slides needed power. Onboard panic grew. Some passengers tried to grab their bags. Others screamed for help. But amid the terror, one cabin crew member took charge. Purser Hussein Nasser Luta, one of Emirates' most experienced flight attendants, shouted over the chaos, "Leave everything! Move! Move! Move!" He led the evacuation manually, pulling emergency handles, deploying slides by hand, and guiding terrified passengers through walls of smoke. Meanwhile, rescue teams on the ground raced toward the wreck. Firefighters surrounded the burning 777, spraying foam across the fuselage. Every second counted, and inside, visibility was dropping fast. At the rear of the aircraft, flames punched through the cabin walls. The temperature rose beyond 800 degrees. Aluminum began to melt. Still, the crew kept moving passengers toward the forward exits. In just 6 minutes, 300 people had escaped the burning wreck. It was one of the fastest evacuations ever recorded for a wide-body aircraft. Then, the unthinkable happened. At 12:37 p.m., only moments after the last passenger slid to safety. The left engine exploded, a massive fireball erupted, throwing debris across the runway. The shockwave knocked firefighters to the ground. One brave rescuer, firefighter, Jassim Mohammed al-Balushi, was fatally injured while trying to save others. The explosion marked the end of Emirates Flight 521, but thanks to the crew's discipline and courage, 300 lives were saved. As the fire raged, Captain Humaid and First Officer Webb looked back at what was once their aircraft, a charred skeleton surrounded by smoke and silence. They had survived the impact, the explosion, and the fire. But the question remained, how did everything go so wrong in just 90 seconds? When the smoke finally cleared over Dubai International Airport, all that remained of Emirates Flight 521 was a blackened shell of metal and memories. The runway was closed for over 13 hours, one of the busiest airports in the world brought to silence. But behind that silence, a global investigation had already begun. Teams from the United Arab Emirates General Civil Aviation Authority, GCAA, Boeing, and Emirates themselves arrived at the scene within hours. Their mission, to find out why a state-of-the-art Boeing 777 with experienced pilots had failed to land safely in perfect visibility. Inside the wreck, investigators recovered both black boxes, the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder. When they listened, what they heard was chilling. During the first landing attempt, the aircraft was perfectly stable, but as it floated down the runway, a sudden shift in wind speed caused it to lose lift. The captain ordered a go-around, but here's where everything went wrong. The auto throttle system, which controls engine power during takeoff and climb, didn't re-engage properly. The thrust levers moved forward, but the engine stayed at idle. The pilots believed they were climbing, but in reality, the plane was losing altitude every second. By the time they realized the engines weren't responding, it was already too late. The 777 struck the runway at nearly 160 knots, far beyond landing speed. Investigators later discovered that the go-around mode had not been fully armed due to a small timing error, just 1 second between pressing the TOGA switch and the throttle movement, a 1-second delay that cost one life and nearly ended hundreds more. But amidst tragedy, the report also highlighted extraordinary heroism. The cabin crew's discipline and rapid evacuation saved every passenger. The pilot's decision to cut off the fuel supply after impact prevented a much larger explosion. And the airport's emergency response team, including firefighter Jassim al-Balushi, was credited for saving the aircraft from becoming a total loss of life. In its final report, the GCAA concluded that the crash was caused by incorrect execution of the go-around procedure, delayed recognition of low engine thrust, and aerodynamic conditions created by hot desert winds. Emirates immediately updated pilot training worldwide, introducing new go-around safety protocols for all Boeing 777 operations. Today, nearly a decade later, the story of Emirates Flight 521 isn't just about tragedy, it's about survival, courage, and the razor-thin margin between life and death in modern aviation. As the sun rises each morning over Dubai, the scars of that day remain, a silent reminder that even the most advanced aircraft in the world are still flown by humans, fighting seconds, wind, and fate.